On a frosty December night, as snow blanketed the world in a deceptive silence, the air seemed to hum with an anticipation that wasn't entirely joyful. Have you ever stood beneath a star-filled sky, surrounded by the cheerful glow of Christmas lights, and felt the weight of eyes that weren't there? This is the story of one such Christmas, when the cheer of the season came with a shadow too heavy to ignore. The town of Grayson sat quietly under its winter coat, nestled among the hills and woods of the northern countryside. On Christmas Eve, its streets were lined with twinkling lights, houses glowing with warmth, and chimneys releasing plumes of inviting smoke. It seemed picturesque, a postcard come to life. But the streets were eerily empty, save for the occasional crunch of footsteps on snow. No one lingered long outside, though no one could quite explain why. For one family, the Carsons, it was meant to be a fresh start. Ben and Lisa Carson, newly married, had rented a remote cabin just beyond the town for a quiet Christmas, away from the chaos of the city. They were ready to embrace the peace of nature, the charm of tradition, and the warmth of each other's company. But peace wasn't what they found. What began as a simple holiday would become a tale of unanswered questions, unrelenting fear, and the kind of truth that is far stranger than fiction. This is their story, and it's all true. What would you do if your Christmas night turned into a nightmare? Ben and Lisa Carson were an ordinary couple, bound by the kind of love that's still new and full of promise. Both had grown up in the bustle of the city, and their first Christmas together in the quiet countryside was supposed to be a peaceful escape. Their cabin, surrounded by a sea of white snow and towering pines, was a dream come true, or so it seemed at first. The couple had brought their dog, Max, for company, a loyal golden retriever who seemed as excited about the snow as they were. The cabin felt alive with their laughter, the sound of old Christmas records spinning softly on the turntable. They'd planned everything perfectly. Warm meals by the fire, nights spent watching holiday movies, and mornings filled with the quiet beauty of nature. But nature wasn't the only thing waiting for them in those woods. The Carsons were the kind of people you might know, relatable, kind, unassuming. Lisa had a talent for finding joy in the little things, while Ben, ever the skeptic, prided himself on being practical. Together, they balanced each other perfectly, but even Ben couldn't deny the unease that settled over the cabin as night fell that first evening. There was something about the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. It started small, things they could explain away. The lights flickered briefly while they were unpacking, but it was an old cabin after all. The wind outside was strong, rattling the windows in their frames, and the faint creaks and groans of the wood. Well, that's just what houses do, especially in the cold. But then the noises began. The first sound came from outside, a soft, almost rhythmic tapping against the cabin's walls. Max growled low, his ears pressed back as he stared at the front door. Ben opened it, expecting to see a tree branch swaying in the wind. But there was nothing, just the snow, unbroken, and the towering woods beyond. And then, just as he shut the door, they both heard it. A laugh, faint, high-pitched, and childlike. It came from somewhere deep in the woods. Ben insisted it was just the wind, but Lisa wasn't so sure. That night, as they settled into bed, the cabin grew unnaturally cold. The thermostat read the same as before, but the air felt biting, as if the warmth had been drained from the room. And then came the creak, the unmistakable sound of a floorboard bending beneath weight, just outside their bedroom door. The next morning, they found it on the porch, a small package wrapped in red paper and tied with a silver ribbon. There was no note, no return address, just a faint smudge of dirt on the ribbon, as if it had been left there by unwashed hands. Ben frowned, but brought it inside, setting it on the table. Lisa hesitated before untying the ribbon, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was an antique Christmas ornament, its surface tarnished and chipped, depicting a family gathered around a tree. It looked wrong. The faces of the family were too detailed, their expressions frozen in an odd mixture of joy and fear. From the moment the ornament entered the cabin, the atmosphere changed. The tapping on the walls grew louder, more insistent. Shadows seemed to shift even when there was no light to cast them. And that night, as Lisa placed the ornament on the tree, the laughter came again, this time louder, closer. And when she turned back to look at the tree, the ornament was no longer where she had placed it. It hung in the center, spinning slowly, as though someone had moved it. The strange occurrences began to escalate. It was subtle at first, lights flickering more frequently, doors creaking open on their own. Ben tried to blame it on the old wiring and drafts, but the explanations felt thinner with each passing hour. The night after they received the ornament, Lisa awoke to the sound of faint scratching, like nails dragging slowly across wood. She nudged Ben awake, but when they turned on the light, the room was empty. Then they heard it again, this time from the attic. Max, their usually brave dog, refused to leave Lisa's side, growling at the attic door even after Ben had found nothing. The next day, things took a darker turn. Lisa returned from a walk to find the ornament lying on the floor, shattered. The pieces were scattered far from where it had hung, as if it had been thrown. And as she knelt to gather them, she noticed something chilling. Etched into the floor beneath the tree were small, childlike handprints pressed deep into the wood. By the third night, the tension in the cabin was unbearable. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects fell from shelves with no apparent cause. At one point, as Lisa cooked dinner, she heard faint whispers coming from the living room. When she turned, she saw the television flickering static, though it wasn't plugged in. Ben, growing more agitated, began searching every corner of the house, convinced someone, or something, was inside with them. Unable to ignore the escalating activity, Lisa reached out to the local library, hoping to find some history about the cabin. What she found was deeply unsettling. Decades earlier, the land had been home to another family, a widowed father and his 3 children. They were last seen alive on Christmas Eve, the year 1952. Neighbors reported hearing screams late into the night, but by morning, the cabin was silent. When authorities finally arrived, the family was gone, leaving behind no footprints in the snow, no signs of struggle, only a toppled Christmas tree and a strange ornament left hanging on a broken branch. The tragedy didn't end there. Over the years, every family who stayed in the cabin reported strange phenomena, unexplained noises, disembodied voices, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Local lore claimed the cabin was cursed, haunted by the restless spirits of those who had disappeared. The ornament, in particular, was said to be a harbinger of doom, appearing whenever the cabin was ready to claim its next victims. That night, Lisa woke to the sound of the whispers again. This time, they were louder, closer. Ben was nowhere to be seen. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt the air grow icy, her breath visible in the dim light. The whispers led her to the living room, where she found the Christmas tree's lights flickering wildly. And there, standing by the window, was a figure, a small child, staring out into the snow. Lisa screamed and Ben came rushing in, but the figure was gone. Trembling, she tried to explain what she had seen. Ben, now visibly shaken himself, admitted that he had heard the whispers too, and that they had been calling his name. Before they could process what was happening, a deafening crash echoed through the house. They ran to the source of the noise, the attic. The door hung open, swinging slowly, and from the darkness above came the sound of soft footsteps descending. As the clock struck midnight, the house seemed to come alive in ways they could no longer ignore. Lisa noticed something strange about the snow outside. Footprints. Small, barefoot prints trailing from the tree line to their front door. She nudged Ben awake, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Someone's been here." But when they opened the door, no one was there, and the prints had vanished, erased as if by an unseen hand. Growing desperate for answers, Ben searched the house once more, this time opening every door, checking every drawer. That's when he found it. A journal, old and tattered, hidden behind a loose floorboard under the living room rug. The handwriting was spidery, the ink faded, but the entries spoke of strange events that mirrored their own. Christmas Eve. Footsteps in the snow. The whisper of voices when no one was there. And then, the final entry. They come for the kind-hearted first, the ones who believe. Don't look into their eyes. In the attic, Lisa found something even more disturbing. Boxes of old Christmas decorations, untouched for decades. Among them, she uncovered a photograph. It was of the family from the journal, standing stiffly by a Christmas tree that looked eerily similar to theirs. But the faces in the photograph, they were wrong. Their eyes were dark voids, their mouths stretched into unnatural smiles. That night, the boundaries between reality and nightmare seemed to collapse. As Ben read aloud from the journal, the words began to echo in the room, repeating in whispers that weren't his own. The Christmas tree lights flickered violently, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. When the lights returned, every ornament on the tree was hanging upside down. The house itself began to rebel against them. The walls groaned, the floors vibrated with heavy footsteps, and every mirror in the house cracked simultaneously. Lisa tried to run, but a shadowy figure emerged from the hallway, blocking her path. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It only stood there, its head tilting unnaturally as if studying her. And then, in a voice that wasn't her own, it whispered her name. Ben and Lisa decided they couldn't stay another moment. They packed what little they could, grabbed their children, and bolted for the car. But when Ben turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but the car refused to start. The temperature dropped sharply, their breath now visible in the confined space. From outside, they heard footsteps crunching in the snow, coming closer. Abandoning the car, they ran into the woods, thinking they could escape on foot. But no matter how far they went, they always found themselves back at the house. Lisa screamed as the front door swung open, as if inviting them back inside. Ben hesitated, but a deafening roar, a sound like the groaning of 1,000 voices, sent them scrambling back inside for shelter. Inside, the atmosphere was different now. The warmth was gone, replaced by a bone-chilling cold. The lights flickered out one by one, leaving them in darkness. Then came the sound of footsteps descending from the attic. Slow, deliberate, closer with every beat. Ben grabbed a fireplace poker, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Stay behind me," he whispered. But as the final light went out, the whispers started again, surrounding them. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive, as if the house itself was alive and suffocating them. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, it emerged. Not as a single being, but as a fragmented, shifting shape. Part human, part grotesque imitation. Its face flickered between forms. A child, a grinning Santa, and a hollow-eyed figure cloaked in black. Each face seemed to stare directly at them, as though it could see their very souls. Ben raised the fireplace poker, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. But as he stepped forward, the creature spoke, not with a single voice, but many. A cacophony of tones and pitches, some shrill, others guttural, echoing words from the journal. They come for the kind-hearted first, the ones who believe. The family froze as the creature's hollow eyes locked onto their youngest daughter, Emily. Ben shouted, swinging the poker wildly, but it was as if the creature wasn't fully there. Each strike passed through it, leaving nothing but a trail of cold air. It advanced slowly, almost playfully, backing the family into the corner of the room. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, it reached out, its hand elongating unnaturally, grasping for Emily. She screamed as the room erupted in chaos, lights shattering, furniture toppling, and the walls themselves seeming to warp and twist. Desperation took over. Lisa grabbed the journal, frantically flipping through the pages. "There has to be something," she cried, her voice breaking. Ben held his ground, positioning himself between the creature and his family. Then Lisa found it, a passage scrawled in hurried handwriting. "Light dispels the dark. The gift must burn." She looked to the antique ornament they'd received, now sitting eerily untouched on the mantel. With no time to think, Lisa grabbed the ornament, feeling it pulse with an unnatural warmth. "It's the key!" she shouted. The creature recoiled for the first time, its many faces twisting into expressions of rage and fear. Ben grabbed the fireplace tongs, clamping them around the ornament. As he tossed it into the roaring fire, the creature let out a deafening screech that shook the entire house. As the light consumed the room, the house began to tremble violently. Walls cracked, the floor buckled, and the air seemed to collapse inward. Ben and Lisa shielded their children, bracing for the worst. And then, silence. When they opened their eyes, the creature was gone. The house was still, the air light again, and the fire crackled softly as if nothing had happened. But the journal and the ornament had vanished, leaving no trace of the horrors they'd endured. For the first time in hours, the house was still. The fire burned low, casting a soft, warm glow. Lisa held Emily close, her breath steadying. Ben walked to the window, peering out into the snow-covered yard. It was over. At least that's what they told themselves. But something didn't feel right. As Lisa began to gather the children, a sudden noise cut through the stillness, a slow, deliberate creak from the upstairs hallway. They froze. Ben turned to Lisa, his face pale. "I checked every room," he whispered. "There's no one else here." The sound came again, louder this time, followed by the faintest murmur of a voice, soft, childlike, singing a familiar Christmas carol. Ben grabbed the flashlight, its beam flickering weakly as he ascended the stairs. The creaking grew louder, accompanied by whispers that seemed to shift direction with every step. Reaching the top, he stopped cold. The bedroom door, Emily's door, was ajar. Inside, the antique ornament sat on her bed, perfectly intact. Its faint glow pulsed steadily, and as Ben stepped closer, the whispers stopped. The ticking sound filled the air, faster and faster, as the ornament suddenly cracked, releasing a blinding light. When Ben opened his eyes, the house was quiet again. But something was wrong. The warmth of the fire was gone, replaced by an icy chill. He looked around and realized they weren't in their home anymore. The walls were bare, the windows bricked up. Lisa and the children were gone. Outside, snow fell steadily, but the scene was unfamiliar. A dark forest stretched endlessly, the trees twisted and unnatural. In the distance, a figure moved. Lisa's voice called faintly from the forest, desperate, pleading. Ben staggered to the door, flinging it open. But as he stepped into the snow, the door slammed shut behind him, vanishing as if it had never been there. He was alone now, the whispers returning, louder and clearer, speaking his name. And then, from the shadows, a pair of glowing hollow eyes locked onto him. The same whisper echoed in the wind. "You can't leave." This Christmas night was just the beginning. Are you ready for what comes next? And so, the events of that Christmas night remain shrouded in mystery. A family torn from reality, a force that defied understanding, and an ornament that carried with it something far beyond this world. Was it a curse passed down through generations? A malevolent spirit feeding on fear? Or something that defies all explanation? What we do know is this: their story didn't end when the door disappeared. Somewhere in that endless forest of shadows and whispers, their fate remains unfinished. What do you believe happened that night? Was it a ghost, a curse? Or is there something even more terrifying lurking in the unseen corners of our world? Let us know your theories in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest answers are the ones we can't explain. If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. But are you brave enough for what comes next? This is only the beginning of our journey into the chilling and unexplained. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss our next story, a Christmas tale that will leave you questioning what truly lies in the shadows of your holiday traditions. Until next time, sleep well if you can.